Welcome to the Be Bold podcast. I'm Beth Whitman. Hey everybody, thanks so much for joining me for another episode of the She's Bold podcast. If you're new to the show, I invite you to go back to episode 1 and check out the reason why I launched this podcast and why I think it's so important to bring these conversations to you. In short, the She's Bold podcast is where I feature long-form, in-person, one-on-one conversations with bold women. I don't think we hear enough from women who are doing extraordinary things. I don't know if it's because we don't have a loud enough bullhorn to tell our stories or because we're afraid to speak up. But I'm very proud to be an outlet where we get to hear from these amazing women. There are a lot of podcasts out there, and I really appreciate you being here. Many of these podcasts feature women, but most of them are short interviews with the guests that include pre-written questions, sometimes even questions submitted by the guests or their PR person. Now, those shorter conversations may have their place, but for me, I really want to sit down and do a much deeper dive into the lives of these bold women and find out the why and the how of what they do. And that just can't be done in a 20-minute Q&A. Now, I learn something every time I chat with these ladies, and I'm so inspired by their courage, their fortitude, and their persistence. And I know you're finding gems in these conversations as well, pearls of wisdom that strike you and hopefully inspire you to be a better version of yourself. I would so appreciate your support as a listener. You can go to shesboldpodcast.com/Patreon and join our community. Becoming a patron unlocks special bonus content that includes answers to questions I ask guests that only gets shared with supporters. And you can unlock that bonus content for just $5 a month, basically the cost of a pastry at your local coffee shop. That pastry disappears quickly, whereas your access to the content and the community lives on. Thank you to our current supporters, including Nancy, who just joined our community. Okay, on to today's show. Today's guest is Anna Brones. Anna is many things. She's a writer, she's an artist, and a documentary producer. And the thread through all of these is that Anna is a creative. Now, I met Anna maybe 8 years ago or so, and we've stayed in touch via Facebook all this time. So I've been able to watch the growth of all the things she's involved with. Most recently, something very interesting came across my radar, and I really wanted to reach out to chat with her about it. She's a producer on a documentary that's just come out called Afghan Cycles. And after you listen to this conversation, I want you to go rent this movie. You can find all the ways to do that by going to afgancycles.com. So, of course, we talk about the movie, we talk about these bold women bicyclists and the benefits of empowering women, whether in Afghanistan or elsewhere. But we also talk extensively about what it means to be creative, because she brings thoughtful creativeness to everything she does. That's my observation. So many of the women I have on the podcast are living what I would categorize as a very intentional life. They make very thoughtful decisions when it comes to what it is they do. And Anna is high on the list with regards to that. Perhaps it's the way she articulates her thoughts. Of course, right? She's a writer. But I was really impressed with how intentionally she lives, and I think you'll clue into that as well during this episode. I know you'll really enjoy this conversation with Anna Brones. It's funny, we have been online friends.
Yeah,
for
like
quite
a lot
while.
of people these days.
Yeah, and do you remember what year that was that you were in Salt Lake City at that event?
Well, I think that was when I worked at WEM, so that would have been like 2000 and it was probably like 2008.
Wow.
2009.
No kidding.
Yeah, it was a long time
Wow,
ago.
that was a long time ago.
And I was actually trying to think if we would have known each other before that, because I used to do some writing for Matador.
Yeah.
And that's how I was like connected to that whole like online travel.
Right, the travel
writing
blogging community.
Yeah. Because I started that like back in, like 2007.
Yeah.
Just feels like a lifetime ago.
Well, I really got into the community. I think my website, Wanderlust and Lipstick, launched probably in 2007, late 2007.
Okay,
And I don't think I was at Outdoor Retailer in 2008. It would have been a couple of years after that.
Yeah,
I
it might have been
think.
2009. Who knows? But
yeah.
yeah,
But whatever.
a while ago.
Yeah. But I remember meeting you at that
That's so
point, and then
funny.
we became Facebook friends and whatever. And
Isn't
so
that
anyway,
funny?
yeah, it is really funny. You came up on my radar when I saw that magazine, or the article in Outside magazine about you. And I thought, oh, what is she up to? Because my perception of you from so many years ago was that you were in the PR world.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize you were involved in all these other things.
Well, it's also funny one, it's really difficult for us to keep track of all of the various people that are in our circles these days because they're far bigger than
than
anything we could
reality,
ever
yeah.
manage, right? But then two, I think anybody who works in the online space, or, there's a certain persona or things that are posted about you or that you post that, isn't always indicative of everything that you're doing.
Sure. How do you filter out?
For myself, or like what I take in?
Well,
or both.
Actually, both. But
Yeah.
let's go with what do you filter? Like, how do you filter what you put out there in the world?
Honestly, I've been thinking a lot about this, probably more just in the last year or two, because I think I'm constantly, because I do a lot of things, which I think is, for me, just how I am personality-wise. I just have a lot of interests, and sometimes I'm like a bird looking at sparkly things, for sure. I get distracted easily, but I just think I have a lot of interests, and I like to pursue a lot of things, and that works well for me. But because of that, it's often difficult to, if I take a step back, to sort of think, well, if somebody was looking at all of this stuff, what's the common thread? So then I kind of feel, well, to get more work or to sell more books or, to do all of those things, it might be better to have a little bit more of a tighter package that's put out there. But then the more that I think about it, I think, I never want to lose that just sense of like fun with all of that stuff. And I don't want it to ever feel overly curated, for lack of a better word, just because, you just like, I can't take myself too seriously with all of that stuff. And I know that if I tighten things up, I think I would feel really constrained in a way. And I feel that when it comes to like kind of social media or an online presence, I just try to keep it, like, I always tell friends, well, and this is probably why I don't have, millions of Instagram followers or whatever. It's like, it's just what I think is fun. If it feels fun to put it up, put it up, and don't think too much about it.
Right.
Which that platform in and of itself has changed a lot recently anyway. So I think people are consuming that stuff differently. But I think ultimately,
how has it changed?
Well, I just think just talking to people recently, I think everybody's complaining, but there's just more ads. So you scroll through and it's every fourth photo is a promoted
I report
one.
every one of those.
I do too. And then just, I think it's just changed a lot from when we first started using it, when we were following our friends. And it really was like, I was talking to a friend recently, like when we used to use the latergram hashtag, as if it was like we really needed people to know that we weren't posting that thing in real time, which is so almost like sweet now, right?
Yeah.
When now they've become portfolio feeds, which is fine in and of itself. Because I definitely have gotten work out of putting my own work on that platform. So it's not necessarily all a complaint, but I do think that, I think that for a lot of people, it's not as much fun anymore as it used to be, or it just doesn't, I was talking to a friend and she was saying, I actually took it off my phone. And now if I really, really want it on my phone, I actually have to just go back in and download it. She said, which I do sometimes, but not usually. And she said, it's just because, I could say like, oh, it's inspiring. And I think that is the thing that a lot of people say is kind of justification for spending / wasting time on a lot of those platforms, is I think it's easy for us to say to ourselves, oh, but it's really inspiring. And it can be, because I think it creates a really, especially if you work for yourself or you work from home or you work, like I live in a rural town. So for me, that's like a really nice way to plug into just a larger community. And so that can be, it creates a lot of connections. I definitely know people and have worked with people and have collaborated with people that I've met through that. But you have to be able to turn it off too.
Right.
And to not like using it's inspiring justification for, I think when you look, like I have an iPhone, just like a lot of people do. And I think when you look at that the new like screen time thing. When you look at that and assess how much you've been on your phone, it's actually rather horrifying.
It is really horrifying.
It's really depressing, actually.
Yeah. In terms of Instagram, I'm a pretty low user when it comes to it. And I've been trying to post, especially when I come back from a trip or I'm on a trip, I try to post kind of daily for a short period of time. And then I just forget. Like, I am not hooked into it at all. But you're the second person just in a very short period of time who has brought up kind of this changing Instagram, and that it's just not as interesting, to people because of this more, as you said, the kind of curated, where it's all pretty pictures. And this whole thing with the traveler, in the bikini at the Taj Mahal, kind of showing off, it's just not quite as interesting.
Well, it was funny because yesterday, the Facebook servers went down and Instagram wasn't working. And so, of course, the entire internet just like...
They got on Twitter and complained about it.
That was hilarious because I actually just follow a lot of pretty funny people on Twitter. And there were a couple that were like, oh, God, I just wasn't influenced at yesterday. Right? And I just was kind of cracking up because there's somebody I follow who... was talking about like food bloggers, and it was like, I made pasta tonight and didn't even take a photo of it. It was like, I was like, have you people forgotten how to write? Like, what are you going to do now that you can't post a photo? And I think, that's why I think we just can't take it too seriously.
Right.
And unfortunately, I think we're in this world where like all of those things are for people who work for themselves, in some type of online space or just where you need to do marketing promotion, which is essentially anyone these days. If you're running a business or it's really difficult to not use any of those platforms. Now, that doesn't mean you have to use all of them or that they have to be an integral part of an overall plan, but I think it's difficult to get away with not being on any of them. And so because of that, there's people that their entire business models, like I was thinking about that yesterday. I was like, okay, Facebook's not working. And I was like, that's really fine. I actually thought about it. I was like, there's nothing on there. Like if the entire thing went down and lost everything that's on there, I would not lose sleep over that. I was secretly like, if it doesn't come back, that would be great.
Yeah.
Instagram, kind of the same. I mean, it's like I definitely am able to get work out of that just from people knowing my artwork, or it's helpful to promote books and that kind of a thing. But I don't have a business model that's entirely built off of those platforms. So I wouldn't. Now, if my email server went down or I couldn't send emails, that would be incredibly problematic.
Right.
But those two platforms in particular are helpful for me, but they're not where all of my business lies. And for a lot of people, they are. I mean, I think that there's I'm sure, you don't have to Google very much to find the numerous articles that have been written about just the influencer space, particularly on Instagram, and the beautiful, the beautiful women in bikinis in front of, like the gorgeous, iconic viewpoints. A lot of those people, that is, that's just a large percentage of their business. Yeah. So if that goes away, and, inevitably it will go away, something will come up next.
Sure.
And I think I think it's a tough one for people too, because I think it just presents this kind of like existential question of like, are you doing the thing just to do the thing and enjoy it? Or are you doing the thing to share about it?
Well, one thing that I will say is that last year, I was on a trip to Papua New Guinea last August, and there were a couple of guys on that trip. Some of my tours that I do are co-ed, and there were a couple of guys on that trip who had nice cameras, and they were taking these stunning photographs. And I had been using my iPhone for years because I didn't feel like lugging a camera around. But after seeing their work, I just thought, I'm going to go back and get a camera, because for so many years I had been doing a lot of photography.
Yeah.
So I bought a camera, love it. And I have been spending a lot of time in that creative space, doing photography and then posting it. And I am really proud of, I don't care if anybody looks at it or likes it or comments on it.
Yeah.
When I look at my Instagram now, I think I'm really proud of this. This has become a body of work. And say what you will or what I will about that whole curated and just kind of perfect. It's not because I don't post like going out for a run, I look like crap, and I'm all sweaty. I don't post that. I post very specifically beautiful images of other people and wildlife and landscapes on there. And really, I've realized it's just for me, because when I look at that, I'm really proud, and it is a creative outlet for me.
Yeah.
And to a certain degree, Facebook too, I'm just doing it a little bit differently there. It's intermixed with a bunch of other things. But getting into that creative space, as I know we'll talk about, that has been like a little point of pride for me.
No, definitely.
To be able to pull that together.
Well, and I think a lot of people, it's a creative outlet. I think the risk is that, so I take a lot of pictures on a camera, just because I have a nice camera as well. And I do like taking photos. I would not call myself a photographer, but I do enough photography that I can get by. And there's so many photos that just sit on hard drives or, and I'm always kind of thinking like, what should I do with those? And actually I was just in Australia over Christmas in January. And I just got home and I was editing some photos actually for a blog post that I was writing. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to take 10 of these right now, ship them off and get them printed. Just, like I'm not even going to think too much about picking them. Just choose 10 and get them printed. And I've been so happy with those 10 printed photos that I've had at home. Like I just look through them every day and I'm like, oh, these make me happy. I haven't like shared those online. It's like, That's just, and I worked really hard at some of those photos to get them right or get them the way that I wanted them to be. And that's been really fun. And I just got an instant camera.
Oh yeah.
Which I've like been telling everyone about. But
you mean like a little Polaroid?
Like a little Polaroid. Yeah. So it's by a brand called Lomography. So they do a lot of analog print stuff. And it's like, so it just has instant film in it. And like, you've got to get the framing right. You just have to like figure out how to use it and you never know what you're going to get. And that has been such a fun creative outlet as just thinking about your surroundings differently, just thinking about what you're looking at, thinking about a feeling that you want to invoke. And so that's been really fun for me.
Yeah. Like going back to old
super
school.
Old school. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I love all of that stuff. And I think that ultimately those, like Instagram in particular, I think people still really enjoy it because it is fun like that, and I've always followed definitely people I follow. I love the behind the scenes stuff not more than, but I think often I really appreciate the behind the scenes stuff because I think it's the chance to kind of not get to know because you're not actually getting to know those people. But if they're like artists or just people that you're inspired by, it is sometimes really fun to learn about how somebody's process works or what they saw that they were inspired by. And I think that's still the fun component of it.
I'm thinking about some people that I follow. I follow very few, like relatively few people, but Moby is one of them.
Oh,
And he had just posted something that was him in his like bare living room, and he went on to talk about how he doesn't have furniture in there or whatever. It's just kind of a bare thing. But is that the kind of behind the scenes thing that you're talking about? Well, because you wouldn't
see. I mean, where else would you see that otherwise?
Right.
Like he's probably not going to talk about that if he went to a concert of his.
Right.
He's probably not going to talk about that in an article.
And he probably won't be texting me either.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you can always dream. But.
Yeah. Just a guess. Yeah. Wow. So, gosh, we were starting with your Outside magazine article.
Yeah, we got distracted.
We did, but that's no,
life.
Not at all. It is totally life, and it's totally life as a freelancer too, right?
Yeah.
So in that article, the gentleman talked about you juggling many quote unquote jobs and all the different things that you do. How do you describe yourself? Because you do have your hand on so many different projects.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really hesitant or I'm really sensitive to the question, what do you do? Just because I think in our culture, we equate that with what do you do for money? And I think we can all do a lot of things for work and for fun. So I have, in the last couple of years, tried to be really conscious about when I meet people for the first time. Either I ask, what do you do for work? To be really specific about it. Or what do you do for fun?
I ask people what they do for fun.
What are you excited about? Because I think that we do have this tendency to put all of this pressure on our professional selves and make that the defining factor. And that, I think, has gotten us into some pretty dark places just with how we feel.
Well, being so attached to something.
So attached. But certainly as somebody who works freelance and is always having to get work myself, I mean, you have to promote yourself and talk about your work. Otherwise people don't know what you do and they won't come to you for anything. So I mean, the short elevator pitch is I usually just say I'm a writer and an artist. That's normally what I say, just because that's easy and that encompasses a lot of things. And then or I just will talk about a project I've been working on recently that is fun.
Well, that's what I was going to say is that maybe because I know you've just completed it. You probably haven't just completed it, but it has just been released to the world, and we'll talk about Afghan Cycles. Yeah. But I was thinking you probably talk about the most recent thing that you've done if it's a big project.
Yeah. Well, and I think I read this somewhere before. This was ages ago, and it was it was either in a book or an article that was talking about sort of when you are a small business or working for yourself and you're thinking about, we're always thinking about like that elevator pitch or whatever. And it was this business person that had said, often we think about that, just we're sort of trying to identify what it is that we do for work and what are the things that are important. They said the best thing that you can do in those situations with someone ask is identify who the person is asking. And like, you have to talk about the thing that perhaps, like if you're trying to sort of network or you're trying to perhaps promote your work, you're not going to promote all of the things to that one person. And that person might be super plugged into one area of what you do. And then it's really great to talk about that thing. And so I think often listening and just sort of having an awareness of what that conversation is about is, because you don't want to just verbally vomit all over somebody and half an hour later have explained your entire, life and professional steps and just have them like,
well, I think
googly-eyed.
I think so many conversations too is about explaining yourself or explaining things so that it puts it in a context that person understands. And as an example, when I travel and let's say I'm traveling alone and I'm asked where I'm going or who I'm traveling with, if it's a male who's asking me, I'll say I'm traveling with my husband and I'm just meeting him, the next day or an hour later or something. You have to put things into context that people understand. Otherwise, and maybe that's saying that you have kids that you don't have, just to avoid awkward conversations, I guess. And it's kind of that same thing is doing the mental gymnastics of figuring out who you're talking to and what's going to make the most sense to them.
Well, and I think that that's a really important, like whether you're talking about work or just, things you do for fun. I mean, ultimately what that comes down to is taking a step out of yourself, which I think we all could probably do more of, right? I think we get my mom always says to me, like other people aren't worried about you.
So right? Just not being so self-absorbed.
Yeah. Or just, it's like if you're really concerned about the fact that you got a coffee stain on your shirt and you have to go walk around in public, it's like most people aren't going to notice. And if they do, they're concerned about the fact that they forgot to buy the thing for dinner or they're late on their mortgage payment or whatever. Right. And I think it is a reminder that it's just not all about us all the time. And to maybe just have more empathy to the people that we are with, to sort of have an understanding of where they are coming from in that. And, I think it's easy as a woman to often feel that, especially like when you think of like terms like mansplaining, right? I think we can all come up with more examples than we have the time to talk about of times when we've been talked at about something without anybody. And it's happened with women as well, but it does for me. I feel that this happens often with men who are talking to me at something without kind of gauging what my entry level is for that particular conversation. So just having things explained to me where maybe I have some background on that and maybe I don't need the entire explanation. I just need a small explanation or, whatever, but that it's not a conversation. And I think we've kind of lost the art of conversation because of that, because we're sort of so focused on getting our experience and our knowledge out there that we forget to.
Do you think that's a new phenomenon?
I don't think it's a new phenomenon, but I do think that we currently certainly live in this very sort of like expert driven culture. Like we really want experts on everything. I think about that with food a lot. It's like, instead of thinking, what does my body need and what do I feel good eating? When do I feel at my best? It's like, I need a nutritionist to tell me what to eat. Or I need, I need somebody who's like, oh, this new diet is great because so-and-so has a lot of experience in that and it's great and it's going to work for me.
Well, it seems like that's just because we're disconnected from ourselves.
Yeah.
Very disconnected.
Definitely.
And we don't pay attention to the fact that the bag of Doritos that we ate last night makes us tired this morning or put us to sleep on the couch last night because we just sat and ate the whole thing. We don't pay attention.
No.
And that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that specifically, about how we expect experts to give us the answers. But I do think it's just a disconnect.
Well, and ultimately I think we have lost trust in ourselves and the people around us for a variety of reasons. But we just have a lot of we all have a lot of like knowledge and wisdom within us that I think we are almost told that we're not allowed to apply because we don't hit A, B, and C in terms of education or profession or, you know, and that's really unfortunate because I think that it keeps us from kind of coming up, like creatively problem solving problems that we have ourselves when often we are able to find kind of the path forward. But then we have a tendency to seek advice from someone else to like provide us that path. I say that, and I mean, I know perfectly well that there are days when I'm like, can somebody just tell me what to do with my job? You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well yeah.
I mean, it's like easier said than done.
Yeah. We all do that, you know, for sure. We all rely on other people. I'm just trying to understand it in the context of our culture and where and when that happened, because I'm not really sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that there is also, I mean, in the US in particular, just because we have, you know, this illusion of the American dream. I mean, we are a very individualistic culture that's kind of told, you know, if you don't succeed, it's your fault. So I think then what that has done is it has created almost like a distrust within ourselves, because it's easier to say, well, I followed this other thing and it didn't work out, as opposed to, you know, I took my kind of own advice in this moment and it didn't work out, because then it's your fault. But if you kind of take the expert advice and it doesn't work out, you can put that blame, you can externalize that blame. So I think that there's something there that just keeps us from maybe, just being part of the kind of larger community and knowing that we kind of all benefit when, you know, like we benefit when somebody else benefits, and then just kind of helping each other to move forward. Instead, we see it as this kind of like individual version of success, and I have to do everything in my power to be individually successful. And that is to our detriment, I think.
Mm-hmm. While at the same time, we're reading TripAdvisor and Yelp, and the only decisions that we make are the ones that are 5-star reviews. Right. And we don't take the risk to do anything beyond that.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is too bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Because then, it's like we're then afraid of risk on even, and if you want to talk about risk, I mean, when you have the ability and the privilege to be able to choose a restaurant, I mean, that's already putting you in a very different category from a lot of people around the world. So there's already a privilege that comes with that. But then if like that's an area, like then we're not even willing to take that risk to choose something new. I mean, that's,
we do really have to micromanage everything, don't we? I mean, that is the privilege, is that we have so much that we are spending an extraordinary amount of time choosing which head of lettuce to buy.
I know. Well, it's luxury of choices, which then becomes absolutely debilitating. Yeah, because if you don't choose the right head of lettuce from the 10 different ones.
Right. You might not be getting this right amount of nutrients.
And then imagine if you made a salad for people that came over for dinner, and imagine
and you were judged.
Yeah, and you were judged. Oh, the horror.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's a very strange, you know, this culture of kind of like appearances, and it's.
Well, then, do you think that goes back to creativity then, to bring it kind of full circle, that we're not being creative because we're just being sheep herded, you know, cattle herded, because we don't want to make decisions. So we're not exploring our own creativity.
There's definitely probably something to that. I mean, I think we're kind of afraid. Yeah, we're kind of afraid of ourselves and what we're capable of. And I think it's easier to, and sometimes we don't feel, like something that comes to mind is, you know, sort of like houses or interior design, and sort of like where Pinterest has really shifted and it's like the amount of sort of restaurants or cafes that I like, just you pop your head into and you're like, wow, if I'm in here, I have no idea where I am in the world, because it looks exactly the same as every other place, right? Like, unless you take a look out the window and look at the street, you can't really place where you are in the world. And I think that just comes from a general, you know, aesthetics change. Like, look at the 70s and the 60s. Yeah. You can sort of automatically see like when something is from that time, because it looks a certain way. But I think that aesthetically, as we sort of have, you know, the world has gotten smaller in the sense that we just are able to share more ideas quickly and across borders, then things have started to look the same. And we aren't willing to take risks in those areas, because often it's like a business risk. Like if you're opening a cafe, right? You want to attract people in.
Sure.
And how do you attract people in? Well, you make them feel comfortable, and you make them feel like they're coming to someplace cool. And there's like essentially a formula for that now, right? And I think that the people have done the same with, you know, their own personal stuff. I mean, look at look at the amount of like interior design magazines or blogs there are. One, you don't need a new kitchen every year. Two, like if you have an old, and I think about this a lot too, because I don't own a house. I rent. My husband and I rent. And, we have this couch and chair that are really comfortable. They were in that house when we moved in. They're not anything that we would have bought in terms of like something that I aesthetically find pleasing, but we haven't switched them out because it's like, it's not a priority. It's just not a priority. Mm-hmm. And I think that often we live in a culture that has prioritized those like external things. And I think that relates to creativity in the sense that because we've prioritized the external stuff, we haven't necessarily invested in the inner things. And I think that creativity is in that category, that we haven't invested in our creative selves because it's just easier to go by what somebody else thinks, mm-hmm. or an expert that we see as like knowing something in that category.
So what would you say is a way for a person to start pursuing their own inner creativity?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is just to think about your own definition of creativity. I talk to a lot of people who say, well, I'm not creative. And I think we have to sort of start by thinking, what do you think of when you think of the word creative? And I think often people think painter.
That's exactly it. I was going to say, because I'm one of those people who says I'm not creative because I cannot paint. And I live with someone who is a painter, who can draw anything. He just he can just do amazing things. And so I'm a fool compared to that.
Well, meanwhile, you run a podcast and you come up with questions and like there's so many things in your work that you do that are the result of creative thinking.
Well, see, yes, I appreciate that. Thank you. But I think even more interesting is that I'm going to point in the corner there. I've got this little stack of my future creative projects over there where I just went to the art store and I bought all these paints and I bought all this stuff and I'm making my own journal, my own travel journals and all this great stuff. And I'm like, oh, maybe I do have a little bit of creativity in me because now that I've started thinking about these things and buying some supplies, like I just got back from India and I bought some things in India that I can use towards my art. And I was like, hey, wait a minute. I think I'm getting a little creative here.
Yeah. And it's funny too. It is interesting to me that we have sort of equated like the word creative or creativity with art production. I think most people have that. Like I was working on, we were at my sister-in-law's house over Christmas and I was working on a paper cut and she like came out and she was like, oh God, there's like some good creativity happening here. And it was funny because I thought in that moment, so I make paper cut illustrations. So I'm like cutting a piece of paper with an X-Acto knife.
And I'm gonna link to your Instagram account in the show notes because people have to check these out. They are so beautiful.
But it's funny because I just thought to myself, like in that moment where I was just like focused on cutting the paper out, I just was like, I actually don't feel like I'm in a creative. Currently, I'm in like a craft moment. Like I'm in a precision skill. Like I'm cutting. I need to, cut a certain line correctly or whatever. On a larger level, yes, there's like the creativity of bringing that piece to life or having thought about how it was going to come together, piecing the pieces together. But just in that moment, I didn't feel like I was doing creative work. Mm-hmm. And I thought that's so interesting because I do think that we've equated like art making with creativity, and creativity is so many other things. And I think a better way to think of creativity is, one, we should just think more of creative thinking, right? Which is applicable to anything and everything in our everyday lives. Mm-hmm. But two, most of the definitions of something that's creative is, basically finding kind of a new and different way of doing something or new and different use for something that's innovative and unique. And I think that that's where we just need to like shift how we think about creativity in general because I think otherwise we have a block and it's like, yeah, maybe you don't want to paint, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe that's not a thing that you want to do. That doesn't mean that you don't get to be creative.
Right.
Right? Like everybody gets to be creative. In fact, I would argue that it's the thing that we all have as humans. Mm-hmm. It's this kind of inherent human trait that we get to cultivate. My mom always says, because she's an artist, and so we talk about this a lot, and her response usually to when somebody says, oh, I can't draw, or I can't, whatever, I can't, just insert something there. She usually says, well, are you a brain surgeon? And they're like, no. And she's like, yeah, well, you would never say, I can't do brain surgery, right? And we have this like expectation.
You realize that it's a skill that has to be learned.
And I think we think of, art and sort of that like creative practice. I think we think of that as an inherent ability that you're just either born with or you're not, when in fact it's a skill to be cultivated.
Yeah. Good way to put it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to continue. I'm leaving for Morocco in a couple of days, and I'll be gone for a couple of weeks. And then it's my intention. Well, you see, this is also, I do these colorings.
I love it.
With my mandalas, but to me, that's not being creative because I'm not drawing. I'm just filling in colors of something that someone else drew. But I guess you could argue, well, that is creative because you chose the red there and the blue there and the green there and the purple there. And that kind of thing.
I would also ask, like, how do you feel while doing that?
For me, it's a little meditative.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a relaxing thing.
Yeah.
So, and that's what drew me to it is because it's a relaxing thing.
Well, and I think that's why a lot of people do a variety of creative work. Like there's something when you can kind of get into that space where sort of everything else falls away, that feels really good and sort of can often feel very sustaining. Like I know a lot of artist friends, a lot of people are just like, if I just can't not do this work because I feel better doing the work. And even when the work is difficult. And I think that that's an interesting thing, but that's also culturally, because we have so much emphasis on product and outcome, we sort of prioritize that over process when it's actually the process that
well, that's what it's always amazed me, creative types and even coders, people just like coding on their laptop who can be so consumed. An artist can sit for hours and hours and hours and be so consumed and say, I wasn't hungry, I forgot to eat.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, how could you forget to eat like that?
Well, I would agree with you.
But. Yeah. That sounds crazy. But just to be consumed for hours and hours and doing something, and that's that you dive into it and you can't not do it for whatever reason.
Well, and I think that there's and perhaps that's why I think sort of just investing time in your creative self is good for us, because there are very few things that there are just very few areas where we feel that way. I think often physical activity can be one of those things. I think there's a lot of connections between like creative flow and like athletic flow, right? I mean, you're a runner. Like there is that just space where you're just in it.
Yeah.
And you're just there and present. And I think a lot of like, I don't surf, but having friends who are surfers, like that's sort of the sentiment.
I've heard the same thing.
But I've heard the same thing. And
rock
I think,
climbers too.
Yep. And I think that is it's a space. I mean, there's like brain science behind that as to why, like what's going on in your brain when that happens and also why that's good for you. But I think there are so few things that really facilitate that, particularly in this culture where we're constantly inundated with 5,000 things.
Right. And we're also we're looking for the easy out in terms of scroll, Facebook, Instagram, just whatever it is. We're just scrolling and it's completely mindless.
Yeah. There's do you know the website, The Oatmeal? I can't remember his name. It's like the kind of stick figure comics. Yeah. So he has this great, and actually my friend Brendan Leonard, who I did the interview with that you read on Outside. He was the one that had sent this to me ages ago, and I just love it. There's this whole cartoon that's kind of about thinking of creativity as breathing, and like that you're breathing in, so you're kind of like taking in ideas, taking in, inspiration, and then you're breathing out, which is like the creative output part, where you're sort of taking all that thing that you took in and putting it out, and that you have to keep that in balance, because if you keep breathing in, like at some point you have to breathe out. Yeah. And when you breathe out, at some point you have to breathe in, and you can't hold your breath either or you'll die. Right. So to find that balance. And I think that currently we live in a breathing in culture, right? We're in a consumption culture, which is, and I don't mean consumption in the like act of going to a store and buying something. I just mean consumption of ideas, of thoughts, and
we're taking it all in.
We're taking it all in. And the thing is, it's really important to do that because we have to challenge our own ideas and perception of things. We have to learn, sort of that's one of like the great things about being alive, is getting to do that. But then at the same time, if we're constantly only doing that without having some type of, like if you think of reading a book, you read a book and it's like you take in these ideas, and it's really nice. Like if you've spent an hour reading a book, it's really nice to I find, to just take like 5 minutes after you've put it down to you just are sort of like letting those ideas marinate and kind of like culminate in your brain, so that then you can come up with your own version of the thing, or apply something that you read to something that you saw.
Or it's something that you can converse with someone else about. And you're not going to, there's like no great conversation is going to come out of a Facebook post, right? But it may come out of reading a book.
Right. So I think that's where, if you're thinking of that like consuming versus like creating, I think consuming isn't just buying something, and creating isn't just physically making something.
Isn't just painting.
Yeah. And painting is great. I feel like it's the one visual thing that people are like, I'm not creative. And it's like, well, yeah.
There's other ways. Yeah, totally get it.
But so in terms of that consumption versus creating, I think that's probably a balance that we all could benefit from just making more time for. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about your creative output most recently. Actually, it may not even be most recently, because as I said earlier, I know that Afghan Cycles just came out recently, and it's available on iTunes and
Amazon.
Oh, great. Okay. So it can be streamed everywhere. Yeah, got it. So it's available, but it's been a long time in the making. And you were actually the impact producer on that. What does that mean? I hadn't heard that term before.
Yeah. Well, just so we explain to people so they know, Afghan Cycles it's a documentary about women cyclists in Afghanistan. So the film itself sort of follows these young women, both in Kabul, some of whom are on the national cycling team, and then some up in Bamiyan who are just kind of riding bikes for, they want to be able to ride like their brothers to get to school, to go grocery shopping, that kind of a thing. And so it really highlights the bicycle as a tool as a vehicle for social justice and gender equality. So it was just released online on demand on Friday, which is exciting. We premiered it last April at Hot Docs, which is a documentary film festival in Canada, in Toronto. And my good friend Sarah Menzies is the director of that film. And the first production trip that she took for that was in the spring of 2013. So,
long time.
So 5 years between first trip and then premiering, and then now we're at 6 years so we've done like a film festival run for the last year. And so impact producer. So I played a producer role, which in film can mean a variety of things, but I've done a lot of the communications and making sure that we're connecting with other groups or nonprofits that are perhaps working on topics like gender equality or women in sports, that kind of a thing. And then now what we're going to be doing is connecting with people to do grassroots screenings in their communities. So that's kind of the role that I play in that.
Mm-hmm. And during the process, what was your involvement? Did you go to Afghanistan as part of that?
Not as part of those production trips. I have been to Afghanistan. So I went in the fall of 2012, and with another one of the producers on the film, Shannon Galpin, who had done a lot of work in Afghanistan. And on that trip is actually when we found out that there were girls who were riding bikes.
That's when you discovered it.
Which was pretty cool. Yeah. And so we'd come back, and then she and I and Sarah we just met up for coffee one day, and we started talking about it. And Sarah was like, yeah, got to make this film. So then I wasn't on any of the production trips with them, but I've kind of played like a behind the scenes role during that time. So.
Yeah, it's really an amazing story, and it's unbelievable to me. I could never have imagined in a million years that there was a women's, bicycling federation there, and what they have to go through in order to basically just ride down the street, because they have stones thrown at them and they're being called names. It's such bravery.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I think I think we forget how powerful the bicycle can be as a mode of transportation, as a
form of exercise.
Because we live in a car culture, number one, but number two, just because a lot of us have access to bikes,
and we have the freedom as women to walk out the door.
Yeah, and so to think I think to just get people to sort of start to think what if you were told that it was unacceptable for you to ride a bike, just to sort of think about that is kind of the first step. But I think what's interesting too is when you look at the bicycle, like it's not really that long ago that in the United States, cycling for women was seen as very taboo. I mean, if you look at the early 1900s, there's plenty of newspaper articles, and, it's just scandalous, absolutely scandalous. And why is that? Well, it's the same reasons that the bicycle is taboo in Afghanistan. It's because a bicycle means that a woman can get from point A to point B by her own means. She's not dependent on like a man to provide transportation. Yeah. Two, that then means that it's like a woman on her own, doing exercise in front of people, right? It's sort of like then now she's out in public, right? She's been removed from the private domain. She's out in public.
Not wearing traditional dress and that sort of thing.
Well,
too.
And here, that's kind of women cyclists is kind of what pushed fashion changes for women because they were riding in skirts. And then it was like, this is difficult. And so there's this whole kind of evolution of women's fashion as it related to the cycling movement. So I think it's not that long ago that we were facing some of the same things. And I would also say that there's a lot of things that still exist here. I think it's easy for us, particularly as women, to watch stories or hear things about women in countries like Afghanistan. It's really easy to think, oh, wow, it's terrible. It's really bad over there. But the thing is that there's a lot of issues that we have here at home too. And the second that we say to ourselves, it's really bad over there, which sort of means it's really bad over there, it's great here, that's kind of when we start to lose traction on a lot of the headway that we've made for ourselves in terms of women's rights.
Well, we're like a goldfish in a bowl of water. We don't feel the water around us. We don't see our own issues.
Yeah. And I think, the cycling industry in general, there's an issue of gender inequality. There's, from women cyclists, professionals not being paid as much as men. It's harder for women to access cycling as a means for transportation for bike commuting. So when it comes to bike commuting statistics, just women are a smaller percentage of that.
You're talking about here
in the US. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of things that need work here as well. And so that's kind of the goal too, is to have people watch the film and then kind of think, okay, well, how does this apply to my community? Actually, we did a Q&A after a screening last year in New York, and we had a panel with a few people who were working just in a variety of ways locally, engaging their communities. And one of them was a woman who had started a cycling organization to get girls on bikes in New Jersey. And she said during that panel afterwards, she said, it's interesting watching that film because you see just women who are girls who are not allowed to ride because their father doesn't want them to. And she said, we have girls whose families don't want them to ride for different reasons sometimes, but, like safety and that kind of thing. She's like, but there are girls who are not allowed to get on bicycles because their families don't want them riding bikes. And, it's a very different situation here. But just to be reminded that there are those parallels and that there's just always more work to do. I think whatever the topic is, the second that we think we've made it and there's no more work to do, that's when
then the Me Too movement blows up.
But that's just, then you've lost kind of. We can always do better in whatever it is. There's always forward movement. So.
Were you involved in women's rights or kind of the quote unquote activist prior to working on this film?
Not in like a big way. I would say that I've always been interested in women's issues. And is it the Maya Angelou quote that's like, but it's like, of course I'm a feminist. Like I believe in supporting women or something. Yeah. I've always felt pretty strongly about just being a woman myself and having rights. I would say I wasn't really presented with having grown up in the Northwest. My mom's Swedish and my dad's American, and I grew up here and then I've spent a lot of time in Sweden. And both of those places are just fairly equitable for women. The Pacific Northwest you can certainly get catcalled, but it's not I would never say that I experienced a lot of that growing up. I just always felt like an equal.
Where did you grow up?
Outside of Tacoma. Yeah. So I had never really been presented with like what my role was as a woman in a context to like a larger outside world that was, kind of opposed to that. But then I taught English in Guadeloupe in the Caribbean after college. And it was the first time that I, one, was in a minority because it's a French overseas department. And so everybody assumed, because I was white, everybody assumed that I was French. And so I was just in a very different community from my own. And that community was just a much more kind of machismo type of a culture. So yeah, a lot of catcalling all the time, just a lot of situations. Like I remember being behind a woman just walking, and she had 2 kids next to her, it was like smaller kids, and then she was holding a baby. And I just remember a guy driving by and yelling some obscenity at her. And I just thought, man, here's like this woman who's providing for these 3 children, you know, and that's what she's putting up with every day. So that was the first time that I was just presented with that, with that kind of a attitude, which I think is good to be taken out of your normal surroundings and reminded that things are different elsewhere. Yeah.
I was going to say, if you had grown up with that, it may not have been such a stark difference, and it may not have struck you the same way.
Yeah. So I think that was the first time where I had more of an awareness about it. And then I think since then, I've just been more plugged into it. But certainly in the last 5 years, I feel like that just, you know, that fire has just been stoked a lot.
Because of your work on the film.
Yeah. Or just being aware of what's happening around and reading
true.
more.
We're in a different time.
We're in a different time. And I think, just reading more, trying to just read more books that cover these topics and be more knowledgeable about them and learn more and just ask more questions. I think that has been, just really important to me.
Well, I'll certainly say for myself that I have always been one to just say, like, just to do, I just do what I want to do kind of thing. And I don't think of myself as benefiting from or having negative side effects from being a woman. I just think, I'm going to go do this. I'm going to ride a motorcycle from Seattle to Panama, which is something that I did. I'm just going to do it. And I'm not, there's certain safety precautions that I have to take because I am female, but that's just the way it is. And I'm just going to do it. And it's really only been very recently that I've started to think about, like, this maybe isn't so fair. Like, I'm seeing the inequalities for the first time in my life because I have just forged ahead. And not that there's any impediments now to me that weren't there 5 or 10 years ago, but I am seeing it differently. And I'm realizing just how, like, I grew up on the East Coast, and those catcalls were just a part, I grew up in more of a city environment, and those catcalls were just part of everyday life. So I just whatever, you just deal with it. And then I'm just realizing, that stuff isn't really proper. Like, no one should have to deal with that. Like, the mother walking with her 3 kids shouldn't have to deal with that.
Well, and that's what's difficult with it when it's just ingrained in part of your normal. It's things just become normalized over time. And then, one, it's difficult to change them. And 2, sometimes it's difficult to have even an awareness level of them.
Well, it's just like, how much 99% of the Afghan women population doesn't even consider bicycling as a possibility for her. Right. But there is some seed in those women that are featured in the film that for whatever reason, they're going against the grain.
Well, and I think too, like, something that is important to note in that film is that, and we did try to highlight this in the film because it's important, is that all of those women, most of them, have very supportive fathers and brothers. And I think that, that's a culture where you kind of need the permission of the male, of the head of the household. But I think it speaks to just what is possible when we're kind of all on the same page that women's rights are human rights, and we all do better when women do better. So to empower women is to empower all of us, and that it's not like women versus everyone else. It's, we're all fighting for these rights together. And I think that is, I grew up with a very supportive father who was a coach for most of my sports teams when I was little, and has always just done things with me. And I never felt like he was doing things with me to, like, empower me as a girl. He was just like,
you're just a person,
just taking me out because I'm a person, and he wants to share the things that he likes with me. And I think having grown up with that, that's a very powerful thing. And that I think that men, like, we want to work with men to make things better. But I think we also have to remember that this patriarchal system that we live within isn't conducive to all of us doing well. In fact, it's kind of like made to only have a certain few succeed, and that it actually limits everyone's ability to do well. But, you know, I think there's also...
But that's so threatening to those few, those few who get that advantage. It's so threatening to provide that power to other people.
It's interesting that you talked about your trip, your motorcycle trip, because I remember a couple summers ago, my husband and I, we biked from our house down to San Francisco. And I remember we had met these two guys who they had started in Alaska and they were biking. Their goal was to bike all the way down
to Ushuaia.
Yeah, and they ended up not making it then. But I mean, they biked a very far way. And I remember having a conversation with them, and I said, there were some other people there, and they were talking. Somebody had asked, you know, like, well, just kind of how are you guys doing this, you know? And they were talking about like where they camp or that kind of thing, sleep. And then one of them said, yeah, well, you know, usually like if we're in a small town or something, like we'll just roll into town and we'll just like go to the local bar and get a beer and like start chatting with people. And like inevitably somebody just like offers us a room or something. And I thought to myself, if I was traveling as a woman, like with a girlfriend, if it was two women, can you imagine that being your strategy for getting a place to stay for the night? That would mean something entirely differently. And I thought, because I have lots of girlfriends who have done a lot of cycling on their own or with other women, and there's lots of amazing stories and also lots of just depressing stories of instances where they haven't felt safe. But I thought that just that in and of itself creates this very different experience of how you interact with the world around you. And I think that is, that's a tough one it's a tough one to have, I think, just from talking to, my husband and then male friends, it's a tough one to have them even be able to have an understanding of, because it's not something that they've ever experienced. And the only way that they get to experience that is through listening to stories from female friends.
And I think they're starting to get it too. I think that there is a level of understanding now. It's like, whoa, like head slap. Like I had no idea that we were going through that. I think that's what the men are saying now. Yeah. Many men are.
No, and I think that that's great. And I think to relate it back to Afghan Cycles, I mean, I think it's kind of neat for when my dad watched it, or when Luke, my husband, watched it, like it is cool for them to sort of see. I mean, I think they're very inspired by just the women in general, but just to see these like strong families that are supporting each other. I mean, that's really powerful.
Yeah. Well, people definitely need to go see that. What do you think that it takes for those women to be so bold or so brave and kind of break out? Is it quote unquote simply as having a supportive family member, or is there something else there that's going on? Did you see any kind of personality trait within them that made them that you saw as the thing that made them so strong and so independent and headstrong?
Well, you know, I think one, there's a lot of those girls that are profiled, you know, they never set out to be cultural change makers. Like at some point they had the opportunity to ride a bicycle and they were like, this is amazing and feels incredible. And I want to keep doing this, you know? And so, and through doing that, then they sort of take on this role of like leadership and pushing boundaries. But that wasn't necessarily the initial entry point. Like that wasn't the point. Yeah. The point was to be on a bicycle because they felt great doing it. And I think all of us have experienced something that we tried once and we were like, this is great. I want to keep at it.
I want to keep doing more.
Yeah. So I think that there's a little bit of that. That's not even necessarily a personality trait of being headstrong. I think it's just like getting a taste for something that is fun and feels good. And then keeping with that. I do also think that Sarah, the director, she always says that it was so fun getting to spend time with those women, because she always felt like, wow, this is just me when I was younger, you know, interested in sports, excited about going to school and learning stuff, you know, just wanting to do new things. And I think it's so easy for us to look at other places and kind of forget that we all have a lot of commonalities, and our shared humanity is probably more powerful than our differences. And that when you peel back all of the layers, like quite similar. So I think that there's that. as well. Just these are, young adults, like they're in the film. It's kind of interesting in the film too, because we kind of get to watch them grow up a little bit. But when they start, they're kind of in their late teens. And it's just a time when culturally too, politically, like very different time than what their parents had experienced. And just,
their parents experienced a lot more freedom, right? Is that what you're alluding to?
Yeah. So they would have, depending on the age, but, they would have like lived through the Soviet invasion and then the Civil War and then the Taliban coming into power and then the Taliban getting taken out of power. So I think that once the Taliban kind of fell, there was this renewed energy, within Afghanistan of things are possible. And just when I went there, it was like amazing just to meet people my age who were feeling positive, feeling pride in their country and wanting to push things forward. And I think that that's the other thing that is highlighted in the film is like this, this really deep pride of country and place. And
can they come here and infuse that in us?
Well, but I think I was just talking to somebody about this the other day because I thought, it's interesting because I think here, we're in a political moment, obviously, where it's hard to feel proud about a lot of things. Mm. And yet, on the flip side, like when I talk to friends from other places, I always find myself really highlighting the things that I love about being from here, just because I want to express a sort of the love that I have for a certain category of things, be that maybe landscape or, people. And I think that we all carry that wherever we're from. And that's important.
To think about that some. Yeah, I think that is great that you can focus on the more positive.
I mean, I don't always.
Yeah. No, I get it.
I studied abroad in France in college, and that was when George W. Bush was in power. And I definitely, before having grown up in a Swedish American family, like I've always kind of felt that I identified more with my like European roots than I did with my American roots. And I just didn't ever really I just never really felt like I fit in here. And I just remember going to France during that time, and I just had to spend a lot of time and a lot of dinner conversations with the like, America's terrible, this was like George W. Bush years, right? Yeah. It was not a great time. And I just found myself in this position where I was like, I have to stand up for myself and my friends who didn't vote for this guy, who don't believe in the same things, and to remind people that like our current foreign policy is not indicative of like individuals.
Right. And that's what I always tell myself about other countries. It's like, and about us too. It's like, we are not our government, and China is not their government kind of thing. Sometimes it's hard to see past that.
Well, and that's where I think just the power of like individual story is really important, because I think you realize that when you sit down and have a conversation with someone, even if you don't speak the language very well. Like if you share a cup of tea or a meal with someone and just have that place where you come together, I think that then you have a better understanding that, on an individual level, we share a lot.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's really important.
Mm-hmm. So that project is to a certain degree kind of behind you, although you have work ahead in terms of kind of getting it out there and promoting it.
So the job now is to work with people to do grassroots screenings. So we've had a lot of people that have expressed interest in doing so. And so we just have put all the energy into getting the film out online and that kind of thing. So now the focus is to be working with people to sort of host grassroots screenings in their communities.
Mm-hmm. What kind of venue size are you looking for?
Anything. We'll do anything.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the real goal is to, we want people to see the film and be inspired by it. And so a lot of people have either seen it at festivals in the last year or just have heard about it. And they're like, this is amazing. We have this nonprofit in town that works with women and bikes, or, those types of things. Like, we'd love to screen it. So it's those types of things we'd love to do. But I think for people who watch the film, cycling, just Afghan Cycles, as the name says, cycling is a big theme. There's also a lot of other threads in that film that I think are really topical right now. And really important things to talk about. So I think that there's a lot of ways that we can use that film to inspire people to action, whatever that looks like for them and whatever is important to them.
So if anyone listening to this is interested in hosting or they know a venue, what's the best way for them to find you?
So if they go to afgancycles.com, there's actually in the menu, there's a drop-down thing that says host a screening, and there's a form just to fill out with a little bit of basic information.
Perfect. Well, hopefully we'll get some some screenings for you for sure. And I'll link to that again in the show notes for people. So you have, as we started out talking about this, and what's come up through the conversation is that you have your hands on a lot of different projects. How do you juggle that? How do you stay
poorly?
I was going to say, I don't believe that, but who knows? But I'm really curious for very personal reasons, because I do the same thing. Like I have many different projects going on and always trying to juggle. And I have my lists here, and I've got more paperwork on my desk that's just lists of what I need to do and how to organize. How do you focus and organize on all the things that you're working on?
I mean, I think I'm the same. I have a lot of lists on random pieces of paper scattered everywhere.
I discovered bullet journaling recently.
I've never tried it.
Oh, it's
friends
fun.
That do it.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, I don't have a tried and true method by any means. I would say that it goes in waves too, which I think any freelancer would identify with. That there are moments where you just are feeling really good about what you're doing, you're like working on a cool project that you're excited about, you're like happy that you're in control or whatever, and then it's like then you come down to that slump and you're just in that dark moment. And I've had that in the past few weeks of just I've had a few sort of feelers out for new projects or pitches that I've had out that have been turned down, and so like I feel like I've had a lot of no's recently, which is always kind of frustrating. Not just kind of, it's frustrating, and it's really easy to then get really down and then sort of start to say, what am I doing?
Yeah. Do you think it's just, do you think that there's something changing in the environment where the type of work you have been doing has shifted? Or do you think it's just, I just happen to be talking to you on a week when you had some rejection? I think it's just cyclical.
Yeah. I think it's just up and down constantly. And I think if you've been a freelancer for long enough, you know that you have to just like take a deep breath and get through it, because it's going to pick up eventually. Not that you just like sit and wait for something. Yeah, sure. I mean, you have to go after stuff yourself, but I think that there is a little bit of...
You can't get too freaked out about it.
No, you can't. You have to just kind of like give it some space. And I do think that with creative work, we are in a moment where it's really... The barriers to entry for doing creative work are really low, which is really fantastic, because I think it just allows people to get their voices out there, and it allows for a diversity of voices to get out there. However, it has made for... There's just assumption that a lot of things are free, and
it's like photography.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just difficult for people to make money off of creative work, unless you're... Well, and even when you're well known, it's not necessarily easy. But when creative work is part of or all of your profession, it can be really, really difficult and really frustrating, because I think too, like for me, just like with a lot of fellow female freelance friends, it's always really hard for us to, one, value our work, and then to put a monetary value on it. So
that's the artistic person in general, isn't it? I mean, any kind of crafts person has that issue.
So difficult. And our culture doesn't really make that any easier. Like, and I sent off a pitch just a little bit ago, and I was telling my friend, like, actually when I emailed it, it was like, I actually felt guilt because I had put like a budget in there. I felt bad about asking for money, knowing that budget was probably over budget, but I also had put that budget together thinking to myself, well, go as high as possible on the materials fees and stuff, because you can potentially work down. But it's so fascinating to me that it's that difficult. Like, that's the culture that we've created.
But that's a female thing too, isn't it?
I mean, I never want to generalize, but it does feel that a lot of my female friends struggle with that in a really big way. And so that's hard. And I think that when I'm just trying to think about how I manage work, I've just been trying to be a lot better about, just asking for money or asking for compensation, trying to put a real value to what I do, and reminding myself that what I do is valuable. But I do think that it's difficult in this content space where there's so much available all the time.
The first place the first place I noticed it, and the reason why I brought up photography was in the photography space, because I saw photographers who were trying to sell their stock photography who had been making a living on stock photography for so many years. Yeah. And suddenly everything went online, and everything went online for free. And everybody has access to everything through Creative Commons and through Pixabay and through everything else that's out there. Yeah. And it's made it really hard. And then you just have to get creative with how you're going to run your business. And then you lead tours, or you do something that is very personal that nobody else can replicate.
Well, that's the thing. I think you have to find you just have to find the niche that works. But even when you found the niche that works, that doesn't mean that it's just all happy and good and you're just set to go. Right. You know, like you're still juggling that stuff all the time. But the money thing is, and I think too, in a culture where we have equated success with financial success, it's a hard one, because even when you can intellectually take a step back and think, I'm happy, I'm doing what I want to do, I feel like I'm having impact, I get to spend time with my friends and family, you know, like all of the things that I think we intellectually and emotionally know, like this is what is important. Even then, it's like, yeah, but I only made this much money last year, and I might, you know, like I'm stressed about paying whatever next month. Like that's just hard, no matter, kind of what space you're in. Yeah. And, you know, I think finances are difficult for a lot of people. It's not just for freelancers. Like just finances, money is tough. And you could be making a lot of money and it can still be tough. So it's not that a lot of money is the answer either. But there is this.
Well, don't they say there's a like a happiness point of like whatever $75,000 a year,
right? Because you need to put food on the table and like a roof over your head.
And then once you get past, you get past a certain point, then you're managing your money, and then that's where even more stress comes into it.
It's interesting because I wrote a book a couple of years ago called Live Lagom, and lagom is a Swedish word that means kind of just the right amount. So kind of like not too much, not too little. And that can be applied in a variety of ways. And so from like food to, I don't know, just like work and so there was a chapter in there about work-life balance. And I started that chapter by saying, the thing about this is like, to even have a discussion about work-life balance is a luxury and a privilege. Because if you have the brain space to consider work-life balance, it means that you have enough money to put food on the table and a roof over your head. Now, I think we live in a system where there's not a great infrastructure in place to provide people with just jobs that allow them to do that. I mean, it's like,
especially in the Seattle area,
hard to make ends meet. It's really difficult. So that's not a personal fault. That's like, there's a fault of the system that's in place to just not enable that. But I think, this ongoing discussion of work-life balance, I think is important, because I think we do need to, as a culture, just kind of check our own expectations and then definitions of success. But at the same time, it's really important to just remember that is a privileged space to be in. So I do try to remember that.
So you're juggling lots of things. Yeah. Trying to stay focused. Yeah. as best you can, making your lists. Yeah. Is there any other secret to doing that?
I think it's really important to have a supportive community, whether that's in person or just like you need your team of just people who are going to remind you that what you're, you know, because I just think in your dark moments, it's really easy to be like, what am I doing? And you just need people who can pull you out of that.
How do you reach out to those people, or how do you stay connected to those people?
Well, I have a lot of like text change with girlfriends. Yeah. I mean, I think if you ask I think just definitely a lot of friends of mine, like everybody just has a lot of ongoing texts with girlfriends that it's just like, that's just how like we provide really quick support. And then, you know, like I mentioned before, I live in a small town now and I'm kind of like physically removed from a lot of my friends. So I just spent a few weekends ago with a couple of girlfriends. And that was just like really important to make time for that, to just be present and not have anything else to do, but just be with each other. And so I think making space for that is crucial. And I just think you don't, like when it comes to creative work, like you don't create in a vacuum. Like you're always inspired by things, and collaboration is such an important part of creative work. So I think making space for that too. So whether
you don't isolate.
Yeah. Because you want to be challenged in how you think. And you also want to just be get that spark for new ideas too. So I think for me, it's really important for me to once in a while, like schedule a call with a friend. Not that necessarily we're going to work on a collaboration together, but just to like have a call where we maybe talk about what we're working on, simply because we can help each other to like have another idea, about that thing. Mm-hmm. And that's really helpful.
What kind of environment did you grow up in?
So I moved back to my hometown. So it's like west of Tacoma, so kind of a small. So like I mentioned, my mom's from Sweden and my dad's American. And
do you have siblings?
No, I'm an only child. Mm-hmm. My mom's.
So where did you get the collaboration bug from? Because I would think that
interesting.
I would think that an only child would just be independent and self-sufficient and not so connected.
Yeah. I am. It's funny because I think I was listening to the podcast Call Your Girlfriend, and I think they were talking about how they love collaborating with other women, but they will only collaborate with the people who in high school were the ones who did all the work. Basically the idea being like, I definitely identify as like the person who like in a team in high school was like, okay, I'll just do most of it. So I can, but then to like identify who those people are, like now that we've gotten older and have like a better assessment of the fact that like we all need to contribite to something. And one, just work wise, it's not possible to do everything yourself, but two, it's important to allow the space for other people everybody to take part. But I kind of like that sentiment of like, you find the other people who were just really passionate about the thing or excited about the work.
Not to pass that work on to them.
No,
to make them
collaborate with them.
Oh, to collaborate. Okay,
yeah, to collaborate with them.
So that my mind automatically went, oh, great, like you do all the work and I'm going to go have a cup of coffee.
No. This was like to have the two people who always did the work. And then that meant that they both come to the table and then are going to like equally work together on something. So yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I'd actually never thought about that, of being an only child and collaborating. I just think I grew up in a house where my mom's an artist and I always saw her kind of just being inspired by friends, and I was very social growing up.
She might have been very isolationist as an artist, but if you saw her collaborating with people, then that's.
I think she always had like a pretty supportive community of women around her, and I was always pretty social growing up, so I just liked being with people. I mean, I would say that I am an outgoing person, but I also am very independent and like my alone time, so I have to have a balance of both. And yeah, maybe part of it too is just, I think a lot of people who work in a creative field can really struggle with being afraid of the work or just feeling like you're not allowed to do the work because you don't have the right, this kind of like imposter syndrome thing, right? Like, who am I to be doing this? And I think that doesn't always go away, but that is lessened when you are doing something with someone else. And so I think that there have been moments where I have done something with someone else that I probably was capable of doing on my own, but it's almost like it was easier to do it with someone else.
There's some validation there.
Yeah, because you've got like a team. And so then I think even when you are doing things on your own, I think that's why it's good to still have your team, even if they're not necessarily working on the project with you. But
maybe in a mentor fashion.
Yeah, like you need people to back you up and you need people to challenge you, but you need to have a trusting relationship to be able to have that. So I think that, again, it gets back to this conversation of we live in this like individual society where it's all about us. And it's like, to be better, like you need people around you, right? You need to put work into your relationships and your community in order to facilitate that.
Before we started recording, you mentioned something about that article in Outside and about how in some cases people might over romanticize kind of the hustle, the hustle that's required to cobble together, for lack of a better word. Because do you feel like it's cobbling together?
I do, yeah.
Okay. Because I don't know, sometimes I think that has like a negative connotation to it, but that's what I feel like too. I'm cobbling together all sorts of different things and trying to make it all work. But as you said, that can sometimes be over romanticized. How do you think people might view you without knowing all the background details? How do you think you might be viewed?
Well, I definitely get the like, oh, you're doing a lot of things. Like, how do you even do it all? I get that a lot. And then I sort of think to myself, well, I'm not really doing it well. So there's that. I also think I definitely people are like, you're so prolific, and I think about like the P's of creativity, which is like productivity and prolific and process. And I think that we've put a lot of emphasis on the first two and like not a lot on the third. So like a compliment to somebody who does creative work is like, oh, you're so prolific, right? Like, it's like, yeah, sure. Especially like, I mean, I think we probably all have friends that we said that to, like people who have published another book, or you're so prolific. Well, I mean, it's nice to like produce stuff, but also if somebody spent 10 years working on a book, does that make that any less valuable than somebody who spent 10 years and published 2 books every year, right? Like, just because there's like one person has 20 books and one person has 1 book, is one better than the other? No. And I think it's interesting that we have such a value on output.
Despite quality.
Right. And that's always what we see on the outside. Because you don't see, even though I try to like share process stuff, usually you don't see someone's total process in the online space, or when you're looking from the outside in. You don't see all the dirty work, usually. And even when you do see it, it's still, because you're not that person, you don't have a sense of like what that truly is.
Right.
So I think that's always interesting. It's always interesting to see how people view you on the outside, though, especially because sometimes that can be helpful in like guiding what you do. You're like, oh, you think I do this thing? That's interesting, But yeah, I think that there is this, like we mentioned, I think there is this, we've romanticized this like hustle, right? Because one, we live in the US where there's not a great safety net in terms of healthcare, right. Social welfare, those types of things. And it means that often people have a quote unquote side hustle because they have to.
Right.
I mean, that's what the gig economy is, right? Teachers who then drive an Uber on weekends because
that's how they
pay rent, right? So then that is, in comparison to other Western countries, that's pretty, it's very extreme here. So there's that element of side hustle, is like a side hustle, quote unquote, because without it, you can't make ends meet. Then there's like the quote unquote side hustle, which is you're excited about a thing and
you see a need for it
and you want to be paid for it. So you're putting energy into that. And then sometimes that turns into a full-time thing and sometimes it doesn't. But I think that just that word hustle, like I've really tried to not use it too often, just because it just like romanticizes this enormous like push all the time and drive. And it's like, it's okay to slow down and breathe and like not produce something for a few weeks. But that is so ingrained in us culturally, in this kind of like work is our salvation.
Yeah.
And work is good.
To me, the hustle sounds more like a smarmy car salesman in a velour tracksuit. Like that's what I conjure up as a hustle, quote unquote hustle.
Well, and I think there's all these sort of links to how, why we view idleness as bad, right? And I think work is viewed as good because historically there has been an upper class that in order to survive needed work done for them and made other people do the work. And to get those people to do that work, it was almost like, well, you're doing work and it's good and beneficial. So that's just like a dark, complicated history that has many elements that we don't have time to talk about. But
go watch Downton Abbey.
Or like look at slavery in America. I mean, there's just this whole idea that like work is good is then just manipulated to an extreme and then used to keep people down. I mean, truly. So then I think it's interesting that then with that history and historical context, then we have also now, like, because we're in this kind of like freelance creative space, it's like, yeah, they're getting after it. Oh, look at all their stuff they're doing, like move fast and break things, right? And like, why is that a cultural value?
Did where you live now, I know you mentioned that it's your hometown. Did you make a very concerted effort to move back there because the pace is slower than like coming to Seattle? Yeah.
So at the time, my husband, well, we weren't married then, but at the time we were living in Paris in France, and we just, that had to run its course in terms of, we just needed something different. And he's from Australia originally. And we knew we wanted something different. We just weren't really sure what we were going to do. And we were intrigued by the idea of kind of just being closer to nature. And so the opportunity presented itself to kind of move back home. And since I work remotely and he's an architect and a woodworker, so it's easier for him if he's closer to an urban environment to do some of that stuff. But by the same token, he doesn't have to necessarily be. So we were like, well, we'll just give it a try. So that's kind of how we ended up back there.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think it was like conscious, but also, I mean, we're also there because we're near my parents and I wanted to be able to spend time with them when they're still in good health. And so there's that as well. And I love the Northwest. I mean, the Northwest definitely feels like home, kind of like I feel a connection to the landscape and the environment. But also, I think if my parents weren't there, I don't necessarily think we would have chosen to be right there either.
As we kind of wrap up here, is there anything else that you want to cover that we haven't talked about?
I feel like we went on a lot of, it's funny to me. I always think about this in interviews and podcasts. It's so easy to say, we got distracted or like we went off course, which it's so funny that we criticize ourselves for doing that because it's like the point of a conversation.
Yeah, I don't at all. I don't think, and that's why I explained to you in before we started recording, I said, I don't chop this up at all and move anything around because it is just meant to be a conversation. And that's what happens. And the beauty of these conversations, in my opinion, is that we get to do a deep dive when you would never sit down with somebody over coffee and have this lengthy, at least I don't. I mean, that's not how real life happens. But when you sit down and you have this opportunity, I just love it. And then it is just free flowing. And then I wanted to ask you this, and then let's go back to that. And it's all great. So I love it. I think it's great.
No, it's great. But it's just so funny how culturally, like, I think because like we were talking about earlier, we just want these like snippets of wisdom. So, and it's like, those take time to get to, right? It's like,
they do.
You need to go down the path and then turn left and then turn right and then come all the way back. You know, it's like if it was a map, it would just be super messy. Mm-hmm. And I think we love to think that things have a straight line.
Yeah.
And they rarely do. And if they do, it's like probably a bit boring anyway.
Well, I have found, I learned very early on in doing these conversations that I couldn't sit down with someone who had a time limit because if they had 45 minutes, at minute 44, something would come out and I would be like, wait, oh my God. Oh, that was the gem and we can't pursue it. So that's why, I do really appreciate your time.
We don't take time culturally.
Yeah.
And that's another thing my mom always says. We were talking about this earlier, but I think like usually the best wisdom comes from people closest to us. And I certainly have a lot from my mother, but she often says, like there's a difference between like take time and make time because you actually can't make more time. Mm-hmm. Like there's only 24 hours in the day, right? Like if you can magically create a 25th, like let me know.
You can't make it. And I understand taking the time. It's, the 3 hours that I spent last night, watching old house reruns, that's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like, I could have been doing something else.
Yeah.
I could have been exercising
But that's the thing. I think you have to consciously, because you only have the 24 hours in the day. So 3 of it could go to that, or, 2 of it could go to mindlessly scrolling because you just did it at 5 minutes at a time. And then you actually didn't realize that you did it for 2.
Yeah.
But to then consciously say, like I have a good friend who last year she just committed to just reading more. And I don't even know if she had a goal in mind of how many books she wanted to read, but she basically said, I did it because I just wanted to read more women authors and diverse voices. And which is really important to me. But 2, I just realized how much time I was just mindlessly spending doing other stuff. And so I made a conscious decision to like, when that's kind of where I was, kind of had an inclination to like pick up the phone or send an email. That was like book time. Yeah. So, all of a sudden it's like when she was commuting or when she would just always read a book. And she's read so many books and it's like so cool to watch because she shares them. And so now it's like, I feel like I just have this like nice stream of like books that have been recommended. But I thought it's so interesting to use those, like the small amounts of time that we have that are kind of those in-between spaces. Like those are available to us and we get to choose how we use them. And you have to make a conscious decision.
Yeah, you do.
To take those moments and like use them in the way that you want to, because only you are going to choose that, I started
doing something similar last year. Rather than picking up my phone, I carry a book around with me so that when I go downstairs, my office is upstairs. When I go downstairs and have lunch, I've got a book there sitting there and I can, have lunch, open up the book, and then the 10, 15 minutes I might have spent on Facebook, I just got through another, however many pages of my book. And it's just been marvelous. And like I said before, it's like, that's where these great conversations come out of, either, with a guest or with my husband or with someone else. I can have a much more in-depth conversation about a topic because I've just read about it.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. And
much nicer.
Kind of like took it in and filed it away in your brain, like for that next conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely.
Or it led me to another book that's also great. Yeah. I like to wrap up these conversations by asking, what does it mean to you to be bold?
Well, I just saw somebody that makes me think of something I saw the other day about fearlessness. And the comment that was made was, this person had said, I don't think of fearlessness as like living without fear. I think it's living with fear, but like managing that and moving forward anyway. And I kind of feel like that relates to being bold. It's like being bold doesn't mean bulldozing through things and just pushing forward regardless. I feel like it means, like, to me, it means to assess the situation, have a knowledge about, what's taking place and what's happening, and then challenging yourself to go perhaps like a little bit beyond that comfort zone, but not doing so in a way that is blind to everything else, And I think particularly in a world where, like, kind of the self-help world of pursue your passion and, that kind of a thing, when we love those mantras. But I think that there's also room for kind of like pragmatism and being aware of who you are and what you need and adapting to that. Mm-hmm. And that, like, being bold for you might be very different for what being bold for somebody else.
Right.
is.
It's not doing something carelessly, but it's being prepared. And that's, I think about, like, I won't jump out of an airplane because to me, the risk factor and the, if something goes wrong, I'm going to die. Like that, there's just like plain and simple. That's what's going to happen. But I will take risks. I will take calculated risks to do things if I'm educated and I understand what I'm getting myself into. And to me, it might be a bold thing, but it's a calculated risk. And I think there's something within that too, where you educate yourself about it, you know what you're getting into, and you still move forward with it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and that's something that I do think culturally we have put a lot of like emphasis on, just pushing through, just like break down the walls, like just push through, just keep at it. It's like, well, sometimes you have to stop and take a step back and take a deep breath and like assess if really pushing through is the best option, because it's not, but that doesn't make it any less bold. Sometimes it's bold to stop or to end something. Like that's just as bold as moving forward,
making the decision.
Yeah, but it's having the intention.
Right. The intention and the conscious decision. I think intention's a much better word for it, but I think that's exactly it, because I think we are going through life so blindly. I think in so many ways we're not paying attention to things. We're letting a lot of input without paying attention.
And fast. It's like we're just sprinting. Well, I mean, as a runner, it's like, imagine if in every marathon or ultra marathon you can't do that. I mean, you wouldn't finish. You would probably collapse and it would be very harmful to your health. And yet that's how we go through every day almost today.
It is. Anything else you'd like to add?
That's probably good.
I know. That's a good exclamation point on that. Where can people find you and the film and anything else that you're working on?
Yeah. So all my personal stuff, my website's annabrones.com, and then I'm just Anna Brones on Instagram, Twitter, and then Afghan Cycles. I do. It's going to lead us into another conversation. I do a little bit. That's a time suck for me, and it's not really a space that I feel I do. But I don't spend a ton of time on there, and it's mostly for sharing things that I think are interesting. And there are plenty of times when I debate on whether I should just
shut it down.
Yeah, but I do. And then Afghan Cycles is at afghancycles.com. And same for all the social media stuff. It's all Afghan Cycles on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter as well.
Great. Well, we'll check all that out. So, thank you so much.
This was great.
This was fantastic to sit down after that little brief meeting that we had. I remember.
I love it.
So I don't know how many years ago, but this is great. Thanks so much for taking the time to come out here and for biking over too.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Well, ferries plus bikes is kind of the best combination.
That is. Yeah. Well, thanks. No, I think I live a relatively intentional life, but there was something about this conversation that just makes me want to slow down a bit more and take stock of everything. Did that happen to you as you were listening to this? Please check out Afghan Cycles at afghancycles.com. It's such an inspirational movie. Also, you can follow them on Instagram at Afghan Cycles. You can find Anna at Anna Brones on Instagram, where she posts her amazing cutouts. You just have to see these to believe it. And she's also annabrones.com. For links to all the things we chatted about in this episode, go to shesboldpodcast.com, and there you will find the show notes for this and all episodes. You can also find those links and show notes on whatever podcast app it is that you use to listen to this. While you're on the She's Bold podcast website, don't forget to check out my Patreon page. It's basically a way for you to say, yes, I like what I'm hearing on the She's Bold podcast, and I'm willing to support the show and get some special bonus benefits, that special content as well. You can find out more by going to shesboldpodcast.com/Patreon. You can connect with me by friending me on Facebook, and I'm WonderGal on Instagram. Ladies, you can join the Be Bold Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/BeBoldGroup. And thanks for joining me for another episode of the She's Bold podcast. Until next time, be bold.